This is Geek Gab with your host, Darnall and me, Daddy Warpig. We are back. Geek Gab for golly, I guess it's Saturday. And I sure hope it's January. No, it's Saturday the 9th of I think it's April now. April 2022. Welcome to another great, grand, and glorious episode of the show that has millions of screaming fans. It's been a day. Sid Arnold, how was your week?
It's been a great week. On the homestead front, I buckled and got myself a riding mower. On the homestead front, we've got an echo. I've muted our guest. You can just check out his cool Dungeons and Dragons shirt instead.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been a great week. Lots of gaming and lots of housework, yard work, and so on. I have returned to the Trollopolis campaign as a patron. So and spoiler, I am playing a clan of dwarves, or I'm leading a clan of dwarves. So the dwarves are on the move. There have been some great, what can I say, advancements in patron technology since I last played. The guys, and big credit to the guy known as Macho Mandalf. They've really taken all of these hidden, unread esoteric rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide and really started to maximize what they could do with just NPCs and patrons and high-level players. I don't want to go into the whole spiel, but it's been a lot of fun. Although my loved ones look at me funny when I say, "Hey, excuse me, I'm going to go sit for an hour and play Dungeons and Dragons with myself."
I believe that Macho Mandolf is spending what seems to player characters to be literally, reams of money on getting them to come to his domain and do stuff for him, but to him is actually not that much money at all. So he is spending his money wisely on getting adventurers to go out and unearth, kill threats to his domain, and unearth old treasure that they can bring back and that he can then tax for 10%.
Tax?
Yeah. Technically, it's a charge on old coins to change them into machadors, which is his currency, because ancient coins are a violation of the law in Macho Mandolf. So there's a 10% charge on those. And you're okay.
Ruthless but fair. Very shrewd leader. So okay, but is that fun? Is that fun? And I want to bring our guest in here because he's wearing the D&D shirt. Do you have any idea what we're talking about, Mr. Jackson?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh my goodness, you are in for a treat. The folks led by Jeffro of Appendix N fame. They started playing AD&D First Edition by the book, and they found out all the weird, obnoxious, fiddly rules that didn't seem to make any sense.
Mhm.
When they actually played everything by the book, and the most important aspect was one-to-one time, where in between session play, every day that passes in the real world, a day passes in the game world. So
Got it.
you never-
I have been following their conversation about this actually. So
There
maybe
you-
I know what you're talking about.
You know exactly what we're talking about. We're talking
Yeah.
about the Bro SR.
Gotcha.
Oh my goodness, I can tax too. Well, as soon as my domain is more than a village of dwarves, I will be levying the duties. My dwarves are now getting busy uncovering as many monsters as they can under the mountain, and generally causing trouble for everybody else in the world. But we'll find out more about that later. It's
still
great stuff.
blows my mind that 1,600 square feet
Cubic.
is just one 10 by 10 square on a map.
Yeah.
That just whacks my mind. I can't fit that into my mental conception of reality.
Yeah, when you think about it, like 10 feet by 10 feet by 16 feet. 1,600.
Yeah, that's 1,600 square feet. Yeah.
Yeah, 1,600 cubic feet.
Cubic feet. Sorry, that's what I meant. I keep on doing the math, and it keeps on coming out the same, and my brain keeps on not wanting to accept it. It's
Right.
just like, no, you're wrong.
It's nuts. And that's the way the book rules go. I mean, I can't help but think that Gary Gygax honestly put together the math, and it was like, okay, a team of dwarves or 3 teams of dwarves working around the clock, they will cut exactly one 10 by 10 square out of the mountain every day. That's it. There's lots more that goes into it, and that's the fastest. Nobody's faster than dwarves. That's cool stuff, and it's all right there. I'm patting my Dungeon Master's Guide right now. I should have a camera. Dungeon Master's Guide right now. It's all in there.
Yeah.
They haven't made.
all
There
right.
it is. That book right there. I hope everybody watching on YouTube enjoys this. That's all the rules are in there. Nobody's made anything up. They've just the game master, who's hanging out in chat. What's up, Brian? Just read these rules and applied them to the game. You know, there is some interpretation to the rules, because as we all know, anybody who's read these old books knows that Gary didn't exactly dot all the I's and cross all the T's. That's right, stone giants are faster than dwarves. All right, I would like to request a new patron, please. I'll give you a team of stone giants. That's awesome. That's awesome. It's all there in the book. Very, very little interpretation, but the implications are. It would be a ton of work for the game masters, but that's where the patrons come in, where you've got someone who doesn't have time for session play or doesn't want to or something like that, and you hand them a high level character, hand them a domain. Sort of what you're doing is you're creating those high-level characters who've already established themselves, that when a game goes long enough, they should naturally develop. You know, I retire my old fighter, he's a lord of a castle now, and he's got armies and whatnot. He doesn't need to go adventuring. But I'm not going to play him. I'm just going to, and the DM takes that character over and says, okay, so this lord does this and that. And so you can just create that situation just by saying, hey, you want to play D&D by email? Well, here's this character, here's his domain, and here are the resources he has at his disposal. Tell me what you think he does every month. And that person's a patron, where they get to just and you just the DM gets to unload all this work on the players. And speaking from experience, actually doing it, it's a lot of fun, even for the time involved. Like it's not a lot of time investment. You don't have to commit 3 to 6 hours to play a session with your buddies every week. It's cool.
And they were one of the discussions that apparently happened about 3 weeks ago in the Bro SR that I missed was about applying these principles of one-to-one time, of patron play, and then the implications of those to other games, and deciding what other games would they work really well with. And I'm really sad I missed the discussion, because I would like to, I would have liked to have been involved and seen what other people's opinions about that are, and what other people's, what games they think that would have worked well with what ideas they would have on modifying that, because I think you could do something like that. And also like in AD&D, what you have with a name level character, a character who gets followers, is you pick a spot on the map and you set up a settlement there, and then you clear the monsters out of the hex you picked, and then that becomes civilization if you then get people to move in and settle down and stuff. So it's got that territory control element. Well, you can translate that to other games. So that's part of the patron play, is the patrons are not just, they're people who have their own interests, their own territory, their own income in the form of the peasants who live there produce X amount of silver a month. And then they can start sending out patrols, they can build roads, they can build up fortifications, build up a keep, and they have wars or conflicts. And conflicts is not direct wars where you're sending armies out, but your interests don't align with neighbors who are close or far. And so you have disputes over trade routes, you have disputes over who controls territory between you, you have, maybe you're sending spies out to find out what each other is doing. Maybe you're sending assassins out or whatever. There are other things that are going on besides direct warfare. Maybe you're negotiating to get an alliance with someone else to, go to one or the other of you. So you could take these same principles and translate them to, for example, and this came up in the discussion we were having last night, Shadowrun. But instead of settling the wilderness and clearing out the wilderness, you would have patrons one-to-one time, and more of a confluence of interests, to where someone would say, well, here I am in this city and I have interests in a particular business area, or interests in controlling all of X goods coming in and out of the city, or interests in a monopoly on whatever, or even as a game you had interests in X territory. We're the 25th Street Diablos, and we control these 4 blocks of the city. And so we control all the crime in this area, or we just control the physical territory, and some Yakuza clan controls the crime. And so you could have patrons who control different aspects of the area. And obviously, you could have hundreds or thousands of NPCs in the city, and you want to focus on like 8 or 9 of them who are actual patrons that are concentrated on your area of play, and then have them play the major NPCs who are in conflict or in alliances in that area. But you can extend those to all sorts of places. You could even make it like, say, more like AD&D in a game like Gamma World or Twilight 2000. There are a lot of different games that you can use these principles with now that the Bro SR has discovered them and has formulated them and is practicing them. And it started to spread outside the Bro SR to people who are not directly giving credit to the Bro SR because of it, which I think is just appalling, really revolting to just be repeating everything the Bro SR has said, everything Chanticleer has said, everything B-Dubs has said, everything Brian has said on his blog in the event, talking about domain management with Macho Mandolf, everything that Jeffro has said, and then not actually crediting these pioneers, just taking the fruits of their efforts and their writing and running with them. And then it's starting to spread far beyond now to where these plagiarists are producing YouTube videos about it and saying, hey, this is this brand new thing I've discovered and just noticed that's in the DMG that has such big impacts for play. And it's like, now a lot of people are even saying, oh yeah, everybody knew about that was already there. And it's like, no, dude, no, I've been doing D&D for a long time, and I've been involved in a wide range of D&D with a lot of people, and never have I ever seen this being promoted, especially the one-to-one time out of play. And I'll tell you why I know that is because no one has ever suggested doing that ever to me. Nowhere have I ever read a campaign journal that says that they did that. Nowhere have I ever read in Dragon advice on doing that, or an advice column telling you why you should do that. I am not an exhaustive reader on GM advice, but I have never seen ever in all of my broad reading in role-playing games, any GM chapter suggests principles like this. And as I have just discussed, they are widely applicable across many role-playing games and would have benefits to a lot of role-playing games. And so I think this is the next revolution for a lot of people willing to step outside the Critical Role audience performance.
Boo. Boo, Critical Role. Oh, sorry.
I don't think Critical Role is bad as far as performance art goes. I don't think it's inherently bad as performance art goes. I think it's bad when people mistake their performance for a model of how a real role-playing table should act. That is, if you watch it and enjoy it, that's fine. If you try to make your own D&D table run just like Critical Role, every comment I've seen on it has always been frustration. People saying, man, I can't make my game run like Critical Role, or every time I try it, it's so much not fun. And they're almost crying in frustration because they think it's something wrong with them. And it's not them. It's that they're fundamentally speaking, trying to do something that's not role playing. And I think that the principles of one-to-one time, patron play, and domain play, territory control, and a few others that have been identified. I've got to get together with Kess because he was mentioning them, and I want to get a definitive list down. And this is going to be the first time I've ever admitted this, Jeffro, but I am adapting those principles because they are very, very, very much in line with what I was doing for the thing anyway. Mass combat rules in AD&D. And I have to say, I've been obsessing about mass combat rules with design of the thing for a long, long time, and I didn't even know why. I've often puzzled through why I was bothering. Every time I was building the combat rules, I was obsessing about mass combat. But yeah, turns out the mass combat is also a key of spell design for all the classes. First level spells being useful, like we found out phantasmal force. It's first level illusionist spell is quite useful because of its range and area of effect when translated to outdoors, can affect an entire army unit. And there are several spells that are built like that right in the D&D, right in the DM, in the player's handbook, that when you translate them to the battlefield, they're mass combat spells. They're not just adventuring spells. And that only becomes obvious once you start playing with miniatures and using the rules as written for mass combat. So mass combat is an integral part of the game, and you only notice why certain spells exist the way they do when you are playing mass combat as it's written. So again, playing the rules as written leads you to realize a lot of things that you wouldn't realize otherwise. So yeah, I am adopting a lot of these ideas and processes for the thing.
I want to jump in and explicitly ask for Jeff Jackson's take.
Well, I'm listening to all this and I'm thinking, I wish I had entertained these modes of thought back when we were playing Boot Hill. Remember Boot Hill?
I'm familiar with it. I never played it though.
Just one of the early TSR games came out around the same time as the basic set. At the time, we weren't imaginative enough to cross-pollinate rule systems with other games, but it would have really livened up Boot Hill had we applied some of the mass combat ways of thinking to that milieu. Now I kind of want to revisit that game, knowing what I know now. Could be a lot more fun.
I hear you.
Memories of it that were just endless gun battles and on the dusty street that ran through the middle of the one horse town.
And you now you can get a little bit more whole engine attacks and Civil War reenactments and whatever else you want.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's
practically de rigueur for the West to have the cavalry, come riding to the rescue and have huge battles with gangs. I mean, there were 200 people in the Cowboys, in the cowboy gang, and then to have, Indian tribesmen in the hundreds fighting with the cavalry and your heroes doing things on the battlefield. That makes me want to play Boot Hill. I'm not going to lie. That's awesome.
Now I'm thinking about the television series 1883.
Oh yeah, I just watched that. We talked about it the other week. What did you
Yeah,
think?
I remember. Oh, it's Boot Hill would have really benefited from that show having been around at the time.
Mm.
It definitely would have informed our play. I didn't mean to get all sidetracked on Boot Hill now, but I just couldn't help but think about it when you started going down this thread, and Gamma World too.
Well, we could. I mean, we could spend all day talking about that stuff, and I'm gonna lay this completely on people who are not me. You were in the shirt, and you mentioned how much you love RPGs, so we had to jump in. But I'd like to, formally introduce you and give you a chance to introduce yourself, what you're about here. Author J.B. Jackson. I am given to understand that your first book is ready to go, and you've got an open Kickstarter for getting copies out. Is that right?
Yep. The name of the book is SHAGDUK, and it maybe sounds like a mysterious name, but you'll know what it means when you start reading it. It's been in the making for more than a decade. Like a lot of people, I have a job, so I don't have a lot of time to write a novel, but I've been chipping away at it all these years. And once the actual writing started to happen, that wasn't as big a chunk of the time. A lot of it was just the conception of it, massive notebooks full of notes. I had ideas for, I thought of this before. I don't want to give too many things away. I'm afraid of releasing spoilers here. But back in the day, I mean, this goes all the way back to D&D in the world of Greyhawk, but also Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. I was fascinated by the idea of imaginary worlds. And I'd go out to play in the neighborhood, and we had this wooded area we called the Lost Valley, which is ridiculous because it wasn't a valley at all. It was actually a hillside behind people's backyards. But when we were in the Lost Valley, it was Greyhawk, it was Mordor, it was whatever we needed it to be at the time. And as I got older, I began to realize when you go outside to play in America, well, let me back up. We don't have as rich a history as they do in, say, Europe. When you're in England or France, you see a plaque and it says, Alfred the Great had lunch here in 868. So it's easy to imagine knights in shining armor, dragons because of, Beowulf and all that. But here in California, you go out into the woods and you're in the redwoods, and immediately I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to see an elf any second now. So I start to think back at the history of what's happened here. And, there were some Native American tribes that are well documented in the area. But before that, not too far before that, there weren't any people here at all. It was just vacant land. People hadn't come over the Bering Strait yet. And so I like to think, well, what if there were people here before that? What would that be like? What if there were civilizations that had existed here and we just don't know about them yet? And I'm not the first person to think about this, because today we do have a lot of fantasy novels and series that take place in North America in the distant past. But so that's what got me thinking about inventing my own world. So I kind of ran up against a brick wall because I was concentrating too much on making it realistic. And so I got a map of the United States out and a blank one, and imagined, well, what would it look like if you filled it in with, Conan style. You've got Samaria up here and whatever. And then I thought, well, I'm going to go back farther than that, before the last ice age, maybe before the penultimate glacial maximum. And then I started looking at maps of the world a million years ago, 100 million years ago. And then what was the climate like here? Could people have lived in that? And I just got bogged down in those details. And it was frustrating. So then one day it kind of hit me: what if this is a parallel world? What if it's the Irish have a name for what is it, the veil? I forgot the name of it. There are areas in the world where this world and the other world are separated by a thin veil, and you can find it in behind waterfalls, or in certain forest glades, or at the end of a rainbow or something. So then I thought, okay, well, that other world is actually well documented. People have staked claims in that. They've planted their flags in it. It's already well established. You've got unicorns over there. You've got elves and dwarves, and all the things that we're familiar with in the world of fantasy. So it's like, well, there's no room for me to go in there and say, oh, well, here's this country that I made up, and here are these people that I made up. So I found a way to invent all that and just make my world. And I have explanations for why it exists, how it got there, what's happened since then, how is this world connected to that world. And then once I got comfortable with that, everything just fell into place. And it's like, yes, this is where my book is going to go. So,
you had a lot of fun actually. What a lot of people like to do is world building, and you just had a lot of fun doing that.
Yes, and it took a long time. I'm talking about, I spent 10 years on this, transcribing notes and organizing them. And I'm losing my train of thought here. Yeah, I'll stop for now until I regain what I was going to say.
Sure. Yeah. I guess that was my fault.
Oh, okay.
I shan't interrupt you again, except for right now.
I know where I was heading with this. So I thought, they say, write about what you know. And so back in the 90s, I wrote these zines. Zine culture was nascent, and a coworker was making one. It's like, oh, what do you got there? And he showed it to me. I'm like, oh, this is really cool. So I thought, at the time I was reading this novel called Diary of a Nobody by the Grossmith brothers, George and Whedon Grossmith. And it was written around 1900, 1910, I think. And it's about this guy, and he's just documenting his boring life. But you start reading it, and it's not boring at all. It's really funny. Just absurd encounters with the butcher, arguments with his wife, vexing encounters with his children. And so I started writing a diary based on an exaggerated version of me, where I would just exaggerate my daily life to absurd proportions so it would be funny. And I'd share it with my friends, and I would trade with other people through the mail who were making zines. And it's just this fun thing I did for a long time. And it got me in the habit of writing in a diary format. It became very easy for me to tell a story in chunks of one day at a time. So when I was thinking about writing a novel, I thought, oh no, I don't know if I can do that. The kind of narrative you get in a typical novel, it's not divided into these neat daily chunks. And I didn't know if I could do it. And then one day I thought, well, what if I make the novel a diary? It's been done before. Diary of a Nobody. Bram Stoker did it with Dracula with letters. So once that opened up a door for me. So I thought, they say, write what you know about. So I'll make the character a librarian who's in a band. Okay, here's day one of the diary. Here's where he is. What's going to happen to this person? That's so exciting that you're going to write it, make it a novel. So I looked at my notes and I pieced it together. I thought, well, this could happen. This could happen. And then it just took off like a snowball effect. And I won't say that it write itself, but I would start writing these diary entries and questions would happen. And I saw this thing the other day. Tolkien wrote a piece, I think it was in response to criticism by the poet W.H. Auden, where Tolkien said, I didn't write an outline for Lord of the Rings. When such and such, who's that? Tom Bombadil appeared. I didn't know who Tom Bombadil was. He said, I'm doing Tolkien now. So as Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, these characters would show up and these places would show up, and he didn't know about them yet. And that's what's happening to me. One of the characters discovers an interesting book that has been donated to the library, and it's downstairs in the basement where they keep all the donations. They've got the rare books down there. It's that you're imagining right now a room that any old academic library would have, where it's just filled with neat old stuff. Well, this librarian goes down in there and he finds this stuff, and one of these items is looks kind of like a spell book, and it's got diagrams, complicated geometrical diagrams in it. It's got formulas. It's written in a language that he actually understands because of another book that he discovered, which was a grammar of this particular language he'd never heard of. And he and a coworker learned that language so they could speak to each other in the library and no one else could understand them. So he finds this thing that looks like a spell book, and it's like, oh, it's that language. Hey, look at this. So he can understand it a little bit. And when I wanted to think, okay, well, what happens next? I just refer to my notes and say, oh, that could happen next. I could go that way with this. And so now I'm at book 2. Book 1 is done. And I do have an outline for book 2, but it's very kind of loosely organized. I know where I want to go with it. I know these certain things need to happen, but the road that I'm taking to get there is filled with a lot of discovery as I encounter, as the main character encounters these people and situations that I didn't anticipate. And I thought, oh, well, this changes everything. What if I turned left here? But I still have to get to my final destination. So anyway, it's a very rich process that counts as a very serious hobby for me. Some people are, they play Dungeons and Dragons or they're involved in ham radio. Well, my hobby has been this world that I created, the world making piece of it, the piece of it that culminated in the series that I'm writing right now. Another very important piece of it for me is the book takes place in 1977 in Fort Worth, Texas. And so because it's a diary and because I want it to be believable, I'm paying careful attention to, well, what happened on January 10th, 1977? How would this character, would he have anything to say about that? What was the weather like that day? Does he need an umbrella? He's going to go have lunch. Where is he going to eat? Well, where does he work? And I'd get out a map of Fort Worth that was published before 1977, so I could get an idea of what it looked like then. So then I got an account with newspapers.com so I could look at the Fort Worth Star Telegram from 1977, and I started to read the paper every day, and it helped get me into that mindset. So when I had a question, well, let's say that the character needed to get rabies shots, and I won't spoil anything and tell you why, but I thought, well, what was the rabies treatment in 1977? What did that look like? So I had to do research. I get on Google, I'd go down all these rabbit holes, and it was that research piece of it that was a really important part of the entire hobby for me. It was just an excuse to learn stuff. And I have learned so much about the world just by doing research for my novel that there were times where it was so distracting that I didn't even worry about writing it. I was just happy to look at Wikipedia all day long and click all the links that took me from bananas to Cuba to the movie Star Wars, which came out in 77. So I'm really preoccupied with all of this to the degree that I'm lost in space. People look at me and they're like, "Hello, Jeff. You know, what's going on?" Oh, yeah. What were you saying? Because I'm just constantly thinking about it, and I've got these. I cut envelopes, junk mail. I cut envelopes in half, and I write stuff on them. And then at the end of the day, I take everything I've written, and I've got hundreds of these, and I organize them. It used to be in a big old binder, but now I do it online in Google. And every single day, one of these little scraps of paper has the next diary entry for my novel on it. I should stop talking for a second so you guys can get a word in edgewise, but I just wanted to point out interviews like this, you talk a lot and people get thirsty. So I thought, well, what am I going to drink on this? Should I just have a cup of water? And I remembered a gift that a very sweet coworker of mine gave me, this can of liquid death. And I'm going to open it now on your show and drink it. So if you see me slumped to the floor, I guess call 911 or something. You guys don't even know where I live, so that may not be helpful. But here I go. I'm going to drink this liquid death, which
liquid death. Get it?
It says sparkling water, but I wonder.
With a
Okay,
name
I'm
like
gonna
that?
guess Ohio.
It's just ordinary water. I live in Sonoma County, California. I've been in California since the 90s, and I've lived here longer than I did in Texas.
I'm going to tell you that wouldn't have even been my third guess.
Yeah, you may not detect the Texas accent. I can hear it.
My second guess was going to be Mississippi, but that's because I couldn't remember Missouri, which is actually going to be my second guess.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I've been dropping in and out. I don't even have the right to ask a question.
Well, when you guys are bickering,
while you're here.
Say really quickly, thank you, John and Mr. Warpig, for having me on Geek Gab. This is really cool.
What does I can't even pronounce that word because I don't know what language it is. I'm guessing that's Latin.
Yeah, it's Latin, and I stole the title from. You may have heard the book De Re Metallica. I can't remember who wrote it suddenly, but I think in Latin it just means of things pertaining to Dord. And Dord is the name of the world that I made up. It's a generic name. It's kind of like how we call this the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really it's not really a proper name exactly. And I don't even really get into it that much in the novel. It's just a word. It's just a sound. But a quick word about it. I think maybe it was in the 30s. There was an edition of the Webster's Dictionary that had a typographical error in it. And the entry was for the abbreviation for density in the field of chemistry. So just a capital D period meant density. So in the dictionary, it said D, capital D, or D, lowercase, density, parentheses, chemistry. And there was a typographical error which sandwiched the whole D or D thing into a word doored. So it looked like the word doored. And it persisted for years until somebody found it one day and they're like, doored? What the hell is doored? You know, I'm a chemist. I've never heard of this word doored before. And they tracked down the error and they fixed it. So the word never really existed. But back in the day, I was doing some music and I wanted a cool name for myself rather than JB Jackson. And a friend of mine suggested, how about Dord? And it seemed to fit with the kind of music I was doing. I'm like, okay, I'll call myself Dord. So it's just been this kind of personal brand name ever since the late 80s that I wanted to do something with. So when it came time to give a name to this world, I just thought, I'll just call it Dord. So it doesn't even, you know, have an etymology yet. I might get there. But when it came time to give the series of books a series title, it's like, well, how do they come up with names for series? And so I investigated. I did a Google search, you know, the greatest 100 fantasy series of all time. Like 37 of them had the word dark, and then 62 of them had the word chronicles, and I think 10 of them are actually called the Dark Chronicles. So it's like, well, I call it the Something Chronicles. It can't be the Dark this or that. And then I remembered in my book, one of the books that they're talking about is called De Re Dordica. And a Latin scholar was evidently aware of this place and he wrote about it a little bit. So I thought, oh, that can be the name of the series. It just felt perfect. And I didn't overthink it at all. I just went with it. So yeah, SHAGDUK is book 1 of the De Re Dordica series.
I have found that when you assign something a title without really thinking about it, even if you think to yourself, okay, this is just like a temporary thing and I'll come back and figure out the real title later, you never do. That's always what sticks.
Yeah, and you don't have to. But you can, and I might.
I think that's a great title.
Well, funny thing, Tolkien invented a few languages to help flesh out the realism in Lord of the Rings. And I wanted to do the same thing. My undergraduate degree was in linguistics, and so I'm interested in languages, and I always wanted to invent some. Well, it's a lot harder than it sounds, and you can devote a lifetime into creating a convincing language. So these days, when you've got like whatever the latest incarnation of Star Trek is, for example, they've got Klingon. Klingon's a real language now, and I just thought, Jesus Christ, that's cool that they put in all that effort to give that world such life. But I work 9 to 5. I don't have time to invent languages. And so I kind of took a page from Tolkien. People may not realize that he essentially plundered Old English, Welsh, Finnish for the languages that they speak in Lord of the Rings. They're not one-on-one correspondences. Like it's not, dwarves don't literally speak Welsh, but what I'm saying is that these real life languages informed his fantasy languages. So I thought, well, I'm going to invent these languages on an as-needed basis. I may not ever need it, but when I get to a place in my book where I need a little phrase or a word, because of I've got this whole lost continent background. Once upon a time, there was a continent off the Pacific coast of California, and the natives called it Volcar, and they spoke a language that our Latin scholar calls Dord, and we don't know why. Dordic is the language. So, hence De Re Dordica. So I've got a few words of Dordic, and it immediately irritated me because the word Dord does not conform to the sounds that exist in the Dordic language. And the way that I fixed that was, Dord is just that Latin guy. That's just his word for the language, and we don't even know where he got it. But the Dordic people who speak Dordic, they have their own word for the language. So you and I refer to the Finnish language as Finnish, but if you're speaking Finnish, you call that language Suomi.
Hey, Suomi and German and Deutsch.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Japanese and Nihongo.
So that problem solved. Next. So I didn't think about it anymore. So because some of this background of this lost continent, it ties into my novel, and you'll get to it in book 2 and book 3. But this continent sank, and I've got this whole reason for it. There was, wizards and demigods and a battle, and the continent sank, and the people who were in charge of it, there were 7 wizards, and they fled with their followers in all different directions, and some of them came to North America. And this would be about 100,000 years ago, roughly. So then when people came down over the Bering Strait across what was at the time, we call it Beringia, and they came down the ice roads into what is modern day Canada and the United States, they encountered people who were already here, and they are the people who came from the sunken continent of Volcar. And I try and look for these happy, how to call it. Tolkien did this too. In the mythology of Middle Earth, there are strong echoes of Germanic mythology because England is closely associated with the Germanic peoples. And so I tried to look for opportunities to tie in my own myths to existing ones. So I looked at the mythology of local Native American tribes, and I looked at things that exist that we know about, but we don't know much about, things that really stir the imagination. For example, the Yonaguni monument off the coast of Japan. There's a sunken structure off the coast of Cuba. What do they call it? The Cuban Underwater Formation is the name they give it in Wikipedia. You may or may not have heard of giants, evidence of giants having existed in North America, and people claim to have found skeletons that are 11 feet long. There are stories of people with elongated skulls, and all of this falls under the realm of, I can't remember the guy's name, but he coined a word for it. It's called cryptohistory. And it's a word that has a pejorative aspect to it. Real historians don't give the time of day to anyone who's interested in cryptohistory. So if you are a history professor at the University of California and you wrote a paper on, I don't know, Bigfoot, you'd get
You laughed at.
laughed at by the academic community, and that has always angered me and irritated me. It's like, well, why not approach these things with an open mind? And if it turns out to be bullshit, you can say, here's why. And the dialogue that you create can be very interesting and perhaps illuminating. But just to completely dismiss it. I've started to investigate some of these crypto historical ideas and thought, how can I tie this into what's going on in my book to kind of give it this undercurrent of not realism per se, but it has echoes of things that you've already heard of, kind of like when in Lord of the Rings, when those peoples from the south come up with their elephants, that has obvious echoes of people from lands where elephants live.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, and off on a little tangent here, I was reading the other day about a guy near San Diego. There's an archaeological dig where they found what appeared to be remnants of stone tools. And so they did carbon dating or whatever, and it came out to be about 100,000 years. So, well, they can't be tools because people weren't here 100,000 years ago. And that was the end of that. No real archaeologist would wanted to talk about it anymore because they would get laughed at. And so I was like, well, come on. Are they tools or not? Is it really impossible that people made them? Let's look at this more closely. We don't really know a lot about who was here when. We just have very scattered evidence, and the picture that has been painted over time, there's just a lot of gaps and windows. So we know that the first people who came over probably came over the land bridge, and it happened within this range of time. People could have come over by boat. We don't have much evidence of that. We really don't know. So I'm using these gray areas to inform what's going on in my book in a way that makes it deeper than it really is, if that makes any sense. It gives us more historical weight. And in my mind, I'm looking around, when I drive down the road to the nearest redwood forest and I take a walk, I don't think about elves anymore. I think about my own mythologies that I've made up that inform my novel. I start thinking about, well, what if one of those wizards and his followers landed over here on the coast of Sonoma County? And it just really gets my imagination going, and it's all me now. I'm not, when I was a kid, I was living out the world of Greyhawk. I was living out Gondor. But now as a 53-year-old, I've got my own mythological stuff that I made up. And it just excites me and makes me want to dig deeper and find out more about it.
Oh, that's awesome. And from if I heard if I understood your narrative correctly, once you broke that barrier of trying to make everything believable, you actually accomplished what you wanted to do, which was a sort of vast and deep world building that still feels real. You've got the verisimilitude that you need to live in that world mentally and enjoy creating stories in that world.
Yeah, and because I let it be an organic process and it took so long to develop, at least to me, it lends to it a high level of believability in a way that it would not if, for example, I thought, you know what, I'm going to make up something that sounds so cool and I'm going to give it a cool name and all this cool shit's going to happen. And then I'll write the story. It happened the other way around. It just developed naturally. And there are aspects of it that are cool probably, but there's a lot of it that isn't cool. And that's because that's how life is. When you read a history book, a lot of it's boring. And then there are these really exciting parts. And we tend to focus on the exciting parts and not on the boring parts. But it's a little bit of that boring stuff, real life, if you will, that fleshes something out and makes it realistic. And I'm thinking in particular, keep going back to Lord of the Rings, but you may remember the scene where they're in the those marshes, and there's the whole discussion about the rabbit stew, I believe. Unlike a lot of the flashier parts of Lord of the Rings, it was those mundane conversations over what are we going to have for second breakfast. The talk about the rabbit stew, the apples that the hobbits were eating that were floating around in the flooded aftermath of the fall of the what's his face's tower.
Yeah, Saruman, yeah.
That gave it it grounded it in reality in a way that sucked me into the rest of the fantasy. It offered a door into that world better than just the relentless historical passages that Tolkien was throwing at us. So when you have a mix of all those things together, you have something that feels like real life. That being said, I should go back to my zine days when I was making these zines. My goal at the time was to write something that was funny. It was humorous writing. I was modeling what I was doing after the Diary of a Nobody book. And I'd share it with my friends and they'd read it and go, God damn, it's the funniest thing I've ever read. And it encouraged me to write more and make them laugh some more. So then when I wanted to write fiction, I thought, well, I want to write, fantasy novel that is scary and dangerous and exciting. And I felt like if I tried to be funny or if it came out funny, that it would ruin it somehow. So I tried to suppress the humorous aspects of it, and I couldn't get it off the ground. It just came off as just being grim, and I didn't like it at all. And so I did have some false starts, and I put them aside, and I thought, I don't know if I can do this. So then I read something about the classical composer Gustav Mahler. I was reading some criticism of his symphonies, where one critic said, he's got everything in Symphony Number 6, for example. He's got the kitchen sink and this and that, and he's got cowbells, and there's laughter and there's sadness. All of life can be found in a Mahler symphony. And I thought, well, shit, he's got humor in there. I know which parts they're talking about. They are kind of funny. And when you have those humorous parts backed up against the tragic parts and the cowbells and all of that, it feels more like something you can connect to. And so therefore after that time, I was able to admit into my writing humorous passages and funny details. And when you have those backed up against, the sadder moments and the exciting moments and the tragic moments, it really ramped up the realism in it. And I think it helps the reader buy into what I'm selling them.
I think that bears out, and I've just started. Just so that you know, we received a review copy from Neil Thanks so much for that. And I just got
Oh,
a few
good.
pages in, and I think, and I see what it is that you're talking about, because you're taking the time to introduce this main character, and he's got his particular quirks and sense of humor and everything like that that really comes out in the writing, while at the same time you are clearly setting up. Uh, if you know that you're reading a fantasy or a horror novel, you know that you're setting up, okay, that's a reference to a cryptid, that's a reference to a mysterious language, that doesn't make any sense to me, right? That sort of thing. Like the things that you've already touched about earlier, like they're
Mhm.
showing through right from page one, but at the same time, you're just, I don't know. I'm going to use a different metaphor. You're letting it breathe, right? Like, okay, this is a real person. This is sort of how he acts and thinks.
Yeah.
And
And it's something that a lot of stories don't do these days. You just get the fantasy part and you don't get any of the other stuff. So you don't know who these people are and you don't feel it because you can't put yourself in their shoes. Where was I going with this thought? If you can identify, they do try it. Have you ever watched a movie where the characters are just these regular people? Going back to The Hobbit, Bilbo was just a regular hobbit living in the Shire, and he had a boring life. And then one day a wizard knocks on his door. And so you think, well, how did this wizard showing up affect his everyday life? So next thing you know, he's on the road. He's going to go slay a dragon or whatever. But on his way there, he still has to feed himself. He's got to get up and brush his teeth. So in my novel, you've got a demon shows up, obviously. But the guy still has to go to work. He still has to pay his rent. He's still got to brush his teeth in the morning, but there's this demon that's there. If you cut out all of that mundane stuff, you might not even have a story anymore. That's kind of my chief criticism of a lot of things that come out these days is they don't give enough. They just focus too much on the cool parts.
right.
There has to be
Like,
some contrast there to give it life.
I want to bring everyone's attention to the Kickstarter. I've got the link in the chat. We'll make sure the link is in the show notes for everybody listening later. Check that out, or you can get the book. We some of the people pointed this out earlier, and I'm just going to scroll. There's an update from Pylum Press. This is a great quote from none other than Ernest Gygax Jr. I'm just going to read this out loud. This is regarding your work. As captivating as the works of Jim Butcher, told by a character drawn with the depth of Jack Vance. It brings to mind my first time reading through the Dungeon Master's Guide. My father would have certainly added J.B. Jackson to his Appendix N. So there you go.
High praise.
High praise. You have a feather in your cap. Your first novel isn't even out yet.
That's high praise indeed, and it's undeserved. But talking about Appendix N, that's kind of where it all started for not only me but for a lot of people. A friend of mine brought D&D to school, said, "Hey, play this cool game with me." And I remember the graph paper and the dice, and opening the door. He's gelatinous cube. So I fight the gelatinous cube, and there's some treasure, and put the treasure in my pocket, and I'd open another door. Another gelatinous cube. So I remember buying one weekend. I was going to go stay at my dad's, and I knew this was out. And I said, "Take me to this hobby shop that's over where you live and buy this book for me." And it was the Dungeon Master's Guide. And here it is. And
Oh
I
yeah.
spent the entire weekend reading this thing like a novel. I started on page 1, and I wasn't even reading it for what it was, a system of rules for a role-playing game, but I was just reading the stuff that's in it. It's like, oh, here's a chapter on spells, and I'm reading these spells, and I was just blown away. It just changed my life. It violently kicked open all these doors to my imagination. So yeah, you get to these appendices, and I love appendices. Lord of the Rings had appendices. Appendix N here is, inspirational and educational reading. These are the things that inspired the makers of Dungeons and Dragons to create this game. And I saw that list, and I'm like, who are these people? What is all this stuff? And it was about the same time that you could go to the grocery store, and you're with your mom, and they're ringing up the groceries, and you're 9 years old and you're bored, and so you're running around looking at stuff, and there are these circular racks of paperbacks. Daw Books was doing those yellow spined titles at the time, and if you looked at the covers, they were paintings done by Boris Vallejo and Frank Frazetta and Jeff Jones and all the other greats. And I'd look at these covers the whole time, my mom's getting her groceries rung up. I'm just staring at this book, The Raiders of Gore, and just thinking, what is this? This is amazing. And
Mom, can you buy me a Gore book?
Exactly. That's what I was. Like, you would buy me this, buy me this. It's too late. She's already got her checkbook out. And so I'm like fishing through my pockets. Can I have $3 or whatever, $2? And I take it home. And I didn't know who the writer was. I didn't know anything about Conan or Gray Mouser. It was just the cover that drew me in. So there's a lot to say about the artwork associated with these books, and with definitely with the Dungeons and Dragons rule books and modules and stuff. Yeah, I mean, I wish I had Frank Frazetta to do an original painting for my novel, but it wouldn't ring true because my novel was written in 2022. And, you see a lot of people who are looking backward at how great stuff was, and we can get to that in a minute. And they love it so much, they want to emulate it. So you've got bands, it's like, we're going to do rockabilly music, and they study it and they reproduce it. And they often fail because it's like they're performing a museum piece. Whenever you've got someone posing as something that happened long ago, and I could go off on a huge tangent here about the arts in general, about how there's nothing about the 21st century to me that speaks to the time we live in. It's all a rehash of what's happened before. So I was conscious of that when I was writing this. It's like, be careful, Jeff. You're writing a book that takes place in 1977. You want to be true to that, as if it were 1977 and you're writing this, because if you fuck up, people are going to spot it and say, this isn't true. You're making this up. So there's a spell that I'm casting that I have to maintain at all times. I'm anticipating a question you might have for me. Why does this book have to take place in 1977? Well, there's no special reason at all, other than it helps take you away from here and now. It takes you to a different place. The 70s, when I grew up, were to me a glorious time to be alive. Everything just seemed so fucking cool. It was the absolute zenith of human civilization, 1977 to 1982. TV was killer. Movies were great. Progressive rock was at its peak. the best punk music was coming out right then. Disco was only going to get better. You had your Hotel California, Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, and you had every reason to believe that every new song on the radio would be better than the last one. And it was incredible. I mentioned at the grocery store, they had those Conan and Elric books, all that sword and sorcery. Imagine picking up one of those as a 12-year-old. It just blew my mind. Heavy Metal Magazine, Monty Python had just come out. Rush was putting out their best albums. Carl Sagan's Cosmos was right around the corner on TV. So SHAGDUK is presented as a diary, and by starting it in 1977, it gave me an opportunity to relive that period of time as a grown-up instead of experiencing it as a kid. It just makes it more fun for me. And I assume for the reader, because if I pull it off well, then
Star Wars came out in 1977.
yeah, and my character in my book is obviously going to respond to that, and he does in book 2. Book 1 is about 300 pages, and you're reading his diary from January 1st, 1977 to May 8th. So a little over 4 months. And I was kind of astonished to think, wow, this is 4 months of someone's diary. It takes up 300 pages. So be it. So yeah, that's the only reason I picked 1977 is I just wanted to relive that time. But I wanted it to be well done. You know, anytime you enjoy a period piece, you're looking for those anachronisms. Aha, they didn't have that car then, or aha, that didn't, they wouldn't talk that way. So I find myself constantly pausing and thinking, oh, here's a good one. Here's a good one. Let me think. Okay. There's a scene in my book, which some people may have already read it because it's in the Philadelphia section. And that was published as an excerpt in this book, The Wells of Ur, that came out earlier from Pilum. The main character of the book, as I said, is a librarian. So there's a couple of days where he and a coworker go to Philadelphia to a library conference. And I tried to evoke that as accurately as possible. I'm a librarian. I've been to library conferences. So what goes on there? And just go from there. So, obviously he writes about it in his diary when he gets back to his hotel room. And one of the things he writes about is some of the booty they got at the conference, a mug that said librarians do it better. So I'm like chuckling to myself, I wish I had that mug. And I thought, well, wait a minute. Did people say that in 1977? Blank, do it better. So I started Googling it. And I got really lucky. I was on eBay and I did a search for vintage and then in quotes, do it better. And the results list was a t-shirt and it said nurses do it better, 1977. So I'm like, what? How do they know this shirt is from 1970? How could they know that? So I looked at the description and they had an anecdote that said, this is a reproduction of a shirt that a fan at a Led Zeppelin concert on like April 10th, 1977 threw onto the stage. Robert Plant picks up this shirt and I think he puts it on. It says, nurses do it better. And he says in the microphone, nurses do it better. My wife is a nurse and I should know. The story was something like that. So I had really well-documented proof that people said things like nurses do it better in 1977. And so I was able to check that off and say, okay, good. I got that right.
Oh, that's cool.
So that's a good example of, learning things along the way while I'm writing that makes it a really rich experience for me as the writer. Obviously as the reader, you wouldn't know anything about the anecdote I just told you.
Okay.
But you
I
managed to find it.
That's
awesome.
cool. Have you used I forget what it's called, but Google's eaten so much data, you can get a graph of the usage of terms over time. I
Oh
don't know
yeah,
how.
I'm aware of it. I don't know how to use it. I forget that it exists. But my editor at Pylum, Neil Durando, he knows about it and he uses it all the time. And sometimes he shares the results with me. I need to remember that tool. It's a really, really good one.
It's awesome, especially if you're curious about current events.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, definitely, definitely.
yeah, if you ever get that tickle in the back of your mind, you're like, this is the first time I'm encountering this word, and these people are using it as if it's, as if we've always been at war with East Asia. I wonder if this is propaganda, and you do that search, and you're like, sure enough, a
Definitely.
spike in usage of X and Y term, engram, that's it. Uh, Spike in usage of this thing. Yep, somebody's trying to do something. Yeah, it's good to see you in the chat, Neil.
Well, a thing about neologisms that fascinates me is in popular culture. How should I say this? Um, we're all aware of these words that just appear out of nowhere, and then suddenly everyone's saying them, and you think, where did this word come from? And if you think about it for a moment, you realize that one person somewhere invented the word and used it. And that is how we got to this point where everybody's using it. It's not the case that the word spontaneously was born in multiple places. That would be impossible. It had to originate from somewhere. That kind of blows my mind a little bit.
And the way that a word can, if it's a useful word or idea, and I'm not using that in a positive way. That's neutral. If it's a useful word, it will explode like that
Yeah.
and just take over, and everybody's saying it. And sometimes it's useful good, like I'm not even going to think of a good example right now, but like sometimes, oh yeah, that describes something that is interesting or important or meaningful. And sometimes it's useful in that, okay, we can get people to get on board with whatever our agenda is, and we'll go ahead and that becomes propaganda.
Yeah.
It's absolutely fascinating.
Well, sometimes we needed the word. It's like, oh, this is perfect. There's this idea that's out there, but we don't have a word for it. Now we do. But then sometimes there already was a word. And it's like, well, why don't you just use this word? This word is just sitting here. It's been here the whole time. We don't need a new word. Just a random example of that would be people are calling records vinyls. And I think
Right.
because records disappeared, really. Um, and then they were rediscovered, and we kind of did need a new word for them because nobody knew what you were talking about. If you said, oh, I bought a record today, what do you mean? Government records, some documents? What are you talking about? So you have vinyl records to distinguish them from all the other records you might be talking about, and then vinyls. And it irritated me at first until it's like, this is the nature of language. This is how language evolves, and it's normal. It's nothing to get upset about, Jeffrey.
That really must, as a linguist, that really must stick in your craw sometimes.
Well, it does, but and then in the discipline of linguistics, you have these two schools of descriptive and prescriptive linguistics, where you've got the people who are simply describing what they see, and then the people who are dictating how it should be. So in France, for example, you have the academy, that some academy that says this is the French language and this is how it will be spoken and written, and they lay down the law. Meanwhile, you have Urban Dictionary, that's the other extreme, where it's here's all the crazy stuff that's out there and we're simply documenting it.
Mhm.
A lot of dictionaries in general operate that way now. They're kind of conservative about what they will admit into the dictionary, but they're pretty responsive when it comes to those neologisms that catch on fire and everybody uses them, and they're like the word of the year. That stuff ends up in the dictionary, as well it should, because it is language and it is English.
Cool.
All right. I've
Yeah,
got some bad news.
I know. I was just about to say, hit me with the bad news, DW.
We are way over time.
Oh, all right. That tends to happen when I start talking. Maybe have me back sometime, and I can talk some more if you want to fill up some more time. There's a number of things I would have liked to have touched on that we didn't get to. So again, thank you so much, both of you. This was a really cool experience. I'm into what you're doing. I get it.
We're into what you're doing now.
No, thank you. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. I'm gonna. Is there anything else that you want to say or plug before we go?
Well, we touched on it a little bit. The Kickstarter is a big deal. It's helping the publisher defray production costs. There are some people who deservedly should be paid a lot of money for the help that they gave us. A shout out to Kirsten, our proofreader, for sure. So yeah, there's the Kickstarter. That's about it. The novel SHAGDUK should be coming out in June. You can definitely buy it straight from the publisher, Pylum Press, but it'll be available elsewhere. But may as well buy it now, because there's some opportunities on the Kickstarter to get signed copies and other little weirdnesses. One of them is an original page from Stephen's diary that exists, and you can own that and have it framed in your study.
That's cool.
You contribute the right amount of money to the project.
I appreciate it. I'm gonna just remind anybody watching live. I hope you enjoyed the show. I do have the Kickstarter up on my screen. Check it out, SHAGDUK. I'll make sure that link is in the description at the end of the show if it's not. Lively chat, you've got a lot of fans and a lot of new fans who really, I think they came here for the RPGs, but they stayed for the cryptids. Really looking forward to that. I'm glad you guys joined us for today. And everybody listening live, I hope you enjoyed the chat as well as take a look at JB Jackson's work. That's all I have for today. Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for being an amazing host, Eddie Warpig. It's your show now.
All right, folks. Thanks to everybody who tuned in and participated in the chat. Things were jumping in the chat today. So whether you listened live or whether you're going to turn in and listen later, youtube.com/Geek Gab. That is youtube.com/Geek Gab. Remember, if you can catch us live, we're here Saturdays, most Saturdays, about 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. You can participate in the chat and gain glory from interacting with the unusually intelligent and sexually attractive members of our audience, and leave your mark on the world. And if you come and listen later on YouTube, all the chat is preserved there in stone for eternity, as it should be. Now then, if you want to listen later, you can, of course, download Geek Gab on the Apple iTunes Store, on the Google Play Store, or on SoundCloud.com. Download it on the device of your choice, or just listen to it on your Windows and or Macintosh personal computer. We want to thank JB Jackson for coming on. It's been a great show today, folks. And we are signing off for today. But don't you worry. Don't you fret. We will be back.